But if I was to pick a color that I really liked for conch shell from the Color Trends palette by Benjamin Moore, I'm about to take a look at Benjamin Moore's paint color conch shell, also known as Tofino Sunset, depending on your region. This color of two different names was selected as one of the newly minted trendy colors for 2023, along with 7 other paint colors by Benjamin Moore. My goal here is to talk about this color, give you some background on what it's about and how to perhaps use it, and I also have some really great color pairings to go with it, as I've created a bit of a color scheme of my own. We've already reviewed the color of the year, Raspberry Blush, so if you wanted to check that out first, you can click the cards up top. Otherwise, let's get into conch shell. So if we zoom out and just take a look at the color on its own without any context, it seems to be a fairly soft, sandy, kind of pinky color that Benjamin Moore beautifully describes as being reminiscent of sepia tone, which is that sort of vintage, warm, monochromatic kind of look you would have seen in older photography. I would define it as a neutral paint color in the sense that it's nothing like a bright green or coral for that matter. Color of the year. Some might even call it sort of beigey. Beige can come with all sorts of different undertones, however. And while we've been used to seeing a lot of the more gray beige colors that come with more of a yellow kind of leaning warmth, conch shell definitely has that earthy red warmth that is increasing in popularity these days. It's because of that I almost see it as a nearly neutral, because it will have just a different feeling compared to the edgecomb grays or the bleaker beiges of the world. We're not as used to seeing this type of warm neutral in the mainstream compared to those other ones. I will say, however, that next to the other colors in the 2023 Trends palette, conch shell really seems like the softest and the most neutral color of the bunch, and that's just due to the large amount of contrast it has to everything else. Context is very important when it comes to paint colors, because something that looks unique on its own can actually fade into the background next to more bold and dynamic colors that are taking all the focus and the attention. The good thing, however, is within this palette that it's part of, it becomes the grounded, safe neutral, which I think is always useful to have when you're putting together a color scheme. I think it's also important to talk about the LRV here, or the light reflectance value. This is a number between 0 and 100, which in turn tells us how dark or light it will appear. Conch shell is right around 55, which makes it a mid-tone paint color. Some of you might be surprised because it sort of seems pretty light because of that airy warmth it contains, but it really is middle of the road in terms of darkness, which means it may seem darker than you might expect in person. I still think that colors within this range are going to generally be more versatile because they're definitely dark enough to be noticed, but not overly so where you're not going to want to use them in your dimly lit rooms in your home. Because of that pretty clear peachy pinky undertone, you can use that to coordinate or complement. You either can pick similar colors or opposing ones for a more dynamic look. It'll feel even more neutral and blend in next to other colors that maybe contain similar undertones like red, orange, pinky colors, even warm browns, things of that nature. Next to cooler colors, however, like green, blue, and purple, you might have a more dynamic interaction, one that is more complementary. Just be mindful of the rest of your decor. Check out the other colors that are sort of existing already in the space, just to be sure you're gonna get the look that you're going for with your newly painted conch shell walls. All right, I can't help myself. Let's get right into these color pairings. I love this part. And if you don't know yet, I have quite a few, including a white paint color, a light color, a mid-tone, a dark one, and then another color from the Trends palette that conch shell's from, that matches up with it really well. Not to spoil anything, but this palette contains a lot of lighter colors. And instead of playing with different levels of contrast, I'm giving you some variety in color hue, which you can have some fun with. Which is kind of why my white paint color choice is extremely basic, for lack of a better word. It's literally called white. OC151. Ironically, I wouldn't even call this the whitest white that Benjamin Moore makes, but I will say it's very stark. It's not influenced by any heavy undertones, and it's just one of those utility white paint colors where you just want something that works and don't want to overcomplicate things too much. I think that's especially important when you're working with different types of colors within a palette. Sometimes it's good to keep the trim as neutral and plain as possible. My light paint color choice is called Halo, and despite its name suggesting it's a beautiful glowing yellow circle. It's actually more of a silvery kind of greeny beige or greenish. It's fairly light at a 73 LRV, especially compared to conch shell. There's nearly a 20-point difference after all. But I like halo alongside it for something neutral, but a little complementary. The little bit of pink and a little bit of green, they sort of play against each other, but in a really nice, vibrant way. Halo is also a great alternative as a main wall color if you wanted conch shell as something more like a, I don't know, soft, subtle accent color, like a barely there accent of sorts. The mid-tone color choice is another somewhat silvery color, but this time taking things into a slightly cooler direction towards blue, and it's called Iced Marble. This color is a bit darker than conch shell, but will seem even more so because of its cool gray aspect. It adds a little bit of dimension to the other colors, which were a little more on the warmer side, especially conch shell. This is another color that has a complementary relationship. So if the jump from warm to cool is a little bit jarring for you, then you can always just use this color in a different room nearby, like maybe a powder room or even the kitchen. You don't always have to use these colors in the same space, although they can work, but for something a little more passive, you can just sort of spread them out a little bit. The dark color I selected borrows a little bit from conch shell. It does have some similarities in regards to its composition and its undertones. It's also not overly dark, with an LRV right around 27. It is the light terracotta clay, potter's clay. While conch shell leans a little towards the pinky side of things, potter's clay favors orange a little bit more. That being said, both colors are kind of derived from red in one way or another, so they will match up quite well. You can easily use them in the same space as light and dark alternatives, or in adjacent rooms that maybe have different lighting conditions, because maybe your living room gets a bit less light than your dining room, so you opt for the lighter conch shell in there to compensate. Things like that. But if I was to pick a color that I really liked for conch shell from the Color Trends palette by Benjamin Moore, surprisingly, I like its interaction with New Age, the other seemingly neutral color of the bunch. Because even though one seems kind of like a beige and the other is a little more gray, it's actually an interaction of peachy pink and silvery purple that really does it for me. And you also have to check out this Benjamin Moore paint color and some other colors that go with it, because maybe it's more up your alley. See you in the next video.